Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is facing a growing internal divide over the AUKUS Defence Pact. Joining me now is Professor Peter Dean, Director of Foreign Policy and Defence at the US Studies Centre. Just had Peter Khalil on this sort of talking it down. What do you make of this? Is this the usual pre-conference headlines, or is there something more to it?
Oh, look, I think this is the usual pre-conference headlines. If you look at the history of the Australian Labor Party in foreign affairs and defence policy going back for decades, at various different times, they've had spirited debate at the local branch level about the direction of Australian foreign policy. We cast our mind back to the 1950s and the 1960s, for instance, they had very spirited debates about the relationship with the United States. And in the 1963 National Conference, they had a particular direct outcome that led to kind of the modern understanding of the alliance that we have with the United States today, which is about the Labor Party reconciling its views on the joint facilities that we have at Pine Gap and Northwest Cape. And I think with the AUKUS announcement coming along and the very strong traditions within the party on the left, in particular around nuclear power, this is, I think, what you would only expect to see. So I'd actually be quite surprised if this type of debate or these types of headlines weren't floating around. But the fundamental difference between what happened in the 50s and 60s in the Labor Party and the Labor Party today is that the National Conference doesn't have anywhere near as much power or sway over the parliamentary Labor Party that it used to have. And of course, some of these branches and the unions that are opposed to this, particularly the union movement, that's been very based around Queensland and Victoria. And to be honest, these are states where there's not a lot of jobs that are going to be directly related to the AUKUS pact, particularly the building of submarines in South Australia and their maintenance and operation in Western Australia. So I think if you look, there's regional variations into this as well, and I expect at National Conference, I'd be very surprised to see if the WA and South Australian unions, for instance, don't come out very strongly in support of it.
It's a good point. Cynicism there, Peter, but I think pretty valid, both on how much this really ultimately sways the Prime Minister of the day, and as well that, if there's some jobs in it, suddenly people's minds are changed. What about, though, is there a bit more, if you like, impetus behind those arguing or maybe more questioning the US alliance, given the ructions in US politics at the moment? We've got an election next year. We know the last one was chaotic. There could be 4 more years of Donald Trump. That is a distinct possibility.
Look, I think we have to say it is at this point in time. Certainly Donald Trump is the front runner on the Republican side. If you look at the broad polls, he's obviously been indicted on a number of charges now. And from a Trump campaign perspective, that leads to a spike in fundraising for his campaign. Although on the outgoing side of the ledger, Donald Trump is also spending an extraordinarily large amount of his campaign funds on lawyers at the moment. And there is some data around in the United States at the moment saying that Republican supporters don't really want to vote for Donald Trump if he gets indicted, or particularly if he gets convicted of one of these crimes. And we still got a long way to go. There's a good year or so before we start to see these election issues, but we do have to count this into consideration. And it's a matter of the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen with the election result, and we certainly wouldn't know what if, and it's a very big if, Donald Trump was elected, what he'd be like. Certainly while he holds onto a very strong core of support within the Republican movement, we saw he really struggled to be able to get broad support within the general election for a presidency, and I think he would really struggle to do so again. But it is a consideration that needs to be thought through.